Social psychology is the scientific study of how people think about, influence, and relate to one another. At heart, it's about questions. What makes for a happy life? How do friendships and romantic attraction work? How can we reduce violence, prejudice, climate change? Or turning things around, how can we promote peace, social justice, and sustainable living? These are just a few of the questions that we'll cover in this course. I'm Scott Plouse, professor of psychology at Wesleyan University and executive director of Social Psychology Network, the world's largest online community devoted to social psychology. Once the course is underway, I'll give you a tour of the network. And throughout the course, we'll use free resources from Social Psychology Network and its partner sites. I'm also pleased to say that the course will give you free access to psychology publications and videos that would cost over $1,000 to buy. For example, they include chapters from some of the best social psychology textbooks ever written, including David Meyer's renowned textbook, Social Psychology, published by McGraw-Hill. They also include journal articles from the American Psychological Association and the Association for Psychological Science. You'll be able to watch some outstanding videos, such as the Abilene Paradox and Quiet Rage, Philip Zimbardo's documentary on the classic and disturbing Stanford Prison Experiment. We even have a few surprises that I've tucked into the course. In fact, I couldn't resist tucking a little surprise into this video as well, a surprise that relates to one of the first topics that we'll cover in this course, the psychological construction of reality. Now, to see what I mean, take a look at the logo image for this course. If you're like most people, nothing looks especially unusual. But what if I tell you that something's wrong? Even then, most people don't see anything out of place. So let me call attention specifically to the 10 of diamonds on the right. Do you see it now? Even with this amount of prompting, many people don't notice that the diamonds are black when they should be red. I originally started with this image and turned the diamonds black using Photoshop. Now, of course, some people may have visual impairments or might not be familiar with playing cards, but if you're used to seeing red diamonds and you didn't notice what was wrong before I pointed it out, you might be asking yourself, how could I have missed that? The answer is that perceptions are selective. We often see what we expect to see and don't see what we don't expect to see. Normally, there's no reason to check the color of playing cards. We can safely assume that they're the correct color. But when it comes to social psychology, our assumptions and our expectations can sometimes lead to trouble, and that's one of the things that we'll explore in this course. So, at heart, social psychology is about questions, but it's also about those hidden diamonds, the hidden treasures that we don't notice, but would make our life, our relationships, and our work a little bit richer if we did. I hope that you join me in this course. I hope that you have some fun and leave with some social psychology diamonds of your own. If that sounds good, just bookmark the course website, read the page entitled How the Course Works, and enjoy. Welcome to Social Psychology. I am so glad you're taking this course. I'm Scott Plouse, Executive Director of Social Psychology Network, which I'll talk about in a later video, and Professor of Psychology at Wesleyan University, a liberal arts university in Middletown, Connecticut, almost exactly between New York and Boston, about 2 hours from each city. Here's our corner of the world. Wesleyan is a private university, non-religious, fairly selective and expensive. But thanks to the magic of Coursera and a decision by the Wesleyan administration, this short course is being offered free of charge to anyone who's interested. So let's hear it for Coursera and Wesleyan. Seriously, Wesleyan has contributed funds for the hardware and software needed to create this course as a sort of experiment in higher education and, of course, as a public service. To help administer the course, we have terrific support staff behind the scenes, and a wonderful teaching crew, including students who have previously taken social psychology. As for my own background, the Coursera website already has an overview and links, so I'll be brief. My undergraduate psychology degree came from the University of Minnesota, where I spent many happy hours in dear old Elliott Hall, and my doctoral and postdoctoral work was done at Stanford University with Phil Zimbardo as my graduate advisor. As you can see from this photo, Professor Zimbardo has become something of a superhero in the field, and he's done this course a good deed by generously granting anyone who takes this course free access to his documentary on the famous Stanford prison experiment. You'll also have free access to several other online videos. A great video entitled The Abilene Paradox. In a later lecture, I'll talk about what the paradox is. It's really, really fascinating. Stanley Milgram's classic film Obedience, and an ABC News primetime follow-up. A PBS documentary with surprising research on what makes us happy, and just as important, what doesn't. 2 animated guest lectures. The first, called Secrets from the Science of Persuasion, is a joint lecture by 2 world-class experts on the topic, and the second is on empathy and the power of outrospection, of getting to know yourself not just through introspection, but through the lives of other people. And of course, much, much more. One unique aspect of the course is the large number of individuals and organizations contributing free materials, beginning with David Myers of Hope College and Mike Sugarman of McGraw-Hill, who are allowing us to use 2 outstanding textbooks authored by Professor Myers. Here are just some of the contributors. Please see our course page for a more complete list, and I'll acknowledge others as the course unfolds. These groups have been just incredibly generous. Another unique aspect of the course is that we'll be using resources from Social Psychology Network, the world's largest online community devoted to social psychology. In a later video, I'll give you a tour of the network, which I founded in 1996, long time ago now, and which has had over 250 million page views since then. In that video, I'll describe some features that I think would be of special interest to members of the class, and I'll invite you to join the network. Coursera and Social Psychology Network have teamed up to create some wonderful new resources that I think that you'll like. You can see that the network is very excited to meet you. One other aspect of the course that makes it a bit unique is that we'll begin with a snapshot quiz to take a picture of your thinking before being exposed to the lectures and assigned readings. That way you'll be able to compare your answers with the results of research that we discuss later. In other words, you'll be able to privately view your own quiz answers right in the lecture videos, a new feature that Coursera created just for our class, and as far as I know, something that's never been done before in an online course. And when the course ends, the snapshot quiz will also help you see how much your psychology expertise has changed. You know, it's easy to say that psychology is just common sense, but when you dig deeper, there are all sorts of questions in which you can think of good reasons why the answer might be yes, and equally good reasons why it might be no. In dating and marriage, do opposites attract? Does punching a pillow reduce aggression? Do women fall in love faster than men? Is it true that money can't buy happiness? That's where social psychology comes in. It's the scientific study of how people think about, influence, and relate to one another. It uses many of the same experimental methods found in other branches of science. It uses many of the same techniques for data analysis, and the results of these investigations are typically published in peer-reviewed research journals. And as long as we're talking about research, I should also mention that from time to time in these videotape lectures, I'm going to pause the action to ask you a question. It might be to predict research findings before I share them with you, just to take a guess. Or it might be to ask you about something covered in the lecture, just to make sure that you're following the material. It might even be to ask you a question that doesn't have a right or wrong answer. just to stimulate your thinking, help you think about a topic actively rather than passively watching the videos. Let me just turn out the lights for a moment and give you an example. If you're like most people, you answered yes to this question. Not everyone does, but most people do. What's interesting is that if you give a different set of people the opposite research finding, that is, that attractive people are seen as more intelligent, most people again say that that's what they would have guessed. Why? What's going on here? Well, it's something known as hindsight bias, or the I knew it all along effect, and it's covered in this week's assigned readings. It's the tendency for people to see things as more obvious in hindsight after they already know what the outcome is. The moral of the story with respect to social psychology findings is that whether they're about attractiveness or anything else, they're a whole lot harder to predict when you don't already know what the answer is. And that's what makes it interesting. That's what makes it worth studying. So if you want to know, for example, whether attractiveness is associated with people seeing you as more intelligent, or you want to know whether opposites attract, stick around and you'll learn about that and many other research findings throughout this course. That's the deal. That's the deal. If you commit yourself to a few hours each week for the duration of the course, rather than picking and choosing particular topics or particular videos and readings, if you take it as a package, I promise that I will do everything possible to make this course worth your valuable time. How will it work? That's the subject of our next video. I'll see you there. Welcome back to Social Psychology. In our last video, I introduced our wonderful teaching staff, discussed a few unique aspects of the course, defined social psychology, and ended with a brief demonstration of hindsight bias, or the I knew it all along effect. In this video, I want to talk a little bit about how the course is structured and offer some rules of the road just to make sure that our journey together is a positive one. Like don't park on the yellow brick road. And in just a few minutes, I'll share some exciting news about a feature of our course that I think you'll like. But first, let's talk about how the course is structured. Each week, we'll have a few lectures and related videos, along with some assigned reading. Sometimes the readings will focus on the same topic as the lectures, but more often they'll cover material beyond the lecture so that we get the broadest possible coverage in the short amount of time that we have together. When the lecture and readings do focus on the same topic, the readings will typically be assigned after the lecture. So it's important to follow the order of lectures and readings given in the course syllabus. And of course, to keep up, you'll get much more out of the course than if you skip around or if you do a reading before the lecture it's supposed to follow. The course will have 5 different assignments. The first, called the Random Assignment, will step you through a brief tutorial on random sampling and random assignment, and then ask you to use the randomizer form from Research Randomizer, a social psychology network partner site, to generate your own random sample and to randomly assign individuals in the sample to one of several experimental conditions. In the second assignment, those of you who join Social Psychology Network will create your own page in the network and receive feedback from other class members on the social impression you make. What do other people think of you when they first see your page? And how can you use psychology to improve the impression you make, whether it's on employers, friends, romantic interests, and so forth? For those of you who don't join the network, I'll offer a variation of the assignment in which you create a resume or curriculum vitae and get social feedback from other class members on that. For the third assignment, all you need to do is post 3 times in the class discussion forums, an assignment that some of you have already begun. These posts can be questions, comments, responses to other students, links to outside resources, really anything that contributes positively to your learning or the learning of others. In the fourth assignment, you'll take a web-based interview in which the system remembers every answer you give and asks you personalized questions about your diet and lifestyle choices. The interactivity of this interview goes way beyond a regular web survey to let you see what interview technology might look like in the future. Finally, the Day of Compassion assignment challenges you to use social psychology for the greater good by living 24 hours as compassionately as possible and asks you to reflect on certain aspects of the experience. The assignment will be peer graded, and here's where it gets interesting. Students who complete at least 4 out of the 5 assignments receive a very high score on their Day of Compassion essay and make sure their account settings allow me to reach them, will be eligible for a Day of Compassion award as a kind of incentive to complete the course, learn about social psychology, and use it for the good of society. I'll describe the award in detail later in the course, but let me say just a few words about it now. The first time that the award was given, the winner was Belish Jindal, a wonderful soul from New Delhi, India, whose Day of Compassion focused on preventing sexual abuse in her community. And part of the award was an expense-paid trip to Northern California, where she had the opportunity to personally meet the Dalai Lama, a symbol of compassion to many people. The meeting was sponsored by Stanford University's Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education, and the work was later immortalized when Coursera decorated its building with a drawing they made of Belish and a quote from her about the Day of Compassion assignment. The second time the award was given, it included free airplane tickets, food, and accommodations to meet another world-famous symbol of compassion, anthropologist Jane Goodall, who joined me in presenting the award to Habi Zhang from Chengdu, China, who used social psychology to save a neighbor's child from being beaten, and after taking this course, decided to pursue a graduate degree in public policy. This time around, the winner will receive a free trip to meet another worldwide symbol of compassion, with details on the person, date, and location to be determined. We'll make every effort to choose a date and a place that works for the winner. Or if that proves impossible, one of the 10 class members receiving honorable mention will have a chance to take the trip. So you have a great opportunity to learn about social psychology and use it for the good of others. I'll say more about each of the assignments when the time comes. The other part of the course that's required for learners who want a certificate is the final exam, which will cover the readings, lectures, and other assigned videos. The exam will include multiple choice and true-false questions and be machine graded so that you can see your score right after submitting your answers. If you purchase the course, complete all 5 assignments, and pass the final exam, you'll earn a signed course certificate. And if you complete some additional work that I'll mention later in the course, you'll receive a certificate with honors. Let's pause for a pop-up question, just to make sure this information is clear. I'd also like to say a few words about communication. Even though the course is too large for me or the teaching assistants to answer email, we'll all be monitoring the discussion forums, which is the best way to communicate with us and with each other. Here's one way to think about it. If even only 0.1% of the class were to email me on any given day, that would be over 100 email messages a day, and I would soon be drowning in email. You'd never see me again. So please be good to the teaching staff and don't send us to the bottom of the sea, all right? If you're tempted to email us, here's the image I want you to remember. Okay, maybe that's a little silly, but use the discussion forums. They are as important to the course as the videos and the readings. All I ask is that when you use the forums, you treat people considerately. Whether you're posting or you're responding to somebody else's post, please, no nastiness, no personal attacks, no profanity or ugly language, and certainly no hate speech, which would be grounds for removal from the course. If someone writes something that's insensitive or off base, don't take the easy way out and open fire. Instead, use the forums as an opportunity to help and teach each other, to elevate the discussion. In a letter to one of his students, Korean Zen master Seung San wrote about the power of what he called together action, and I think it fits very well with this course. He wrote, "Together action is like washing potatoes. When people wash potatoes in Korea, instead of washing them one at a time, they put them all in a tub full of water. Then someone puts a stick in the tub and pushes it up and down, up and down. This makes the potatoes rub against each other. As they bump into each other, the hard, crusty dirt falls off. If you wash potatoes one at a time, it takes a long time to clean each one, and only one potato gets clean at a time. If they're all together, the potatoes clean each other." I very much hope that in this course we all become potatoes and learn from each other. Two final notes before I end this video. First, I want to emphasize that this course is not intended to be a comprehensive or even representative introduction to the field of social psychology. Rather, it's one professor's perspective on the field, focusing mainly on material that's useful, fun, and interesting, and emphasizing classic studies that have laid a foundation for later research. In other words, it's sort of like meeting a new person. If you spend a few hours a week for a month or two, you certainly get to know a lot about the person, but you probably won't end up knowing every important thing about that person. If you want a comprehensive introduction to social psychology, my best advice would be to get a full-length copy of David Meyer's social psychology textbook, which can be purchased as a new book, a used book, an e-book, or even rented. Or take a full-length college or university course in social psychology if you're able. And throughout this course, I'll post suggestions for further reading and viewing, and I hope that you'll do the same in our discussion forums. The last thing that I wanted to mention is that social psychology is not the same thing as clinical psychology, which is the branch of psychology most directly focused on understanding, preventing, and treating mental illness and other psychological problems. So if you have depression or other psychological difficulties, my best recommendation would be to talk with a mental health professional. For example, a clinical psychologist, a psychiatrist, a counselor, a social worker, or if that's not possible, someone else whom you trust, someone you feel is safe, supportive, and whose opinion you respect. Social psychologists are not generally certified to provide therapy or mental health advice. But all's not lost. Social psychology can open the door to greater self-understanding and help improve social relationships, intergroup relations, group performance, decision-making, life satisfaction, and many other social aspects of life. That's what we'll spend much of this course on. But first, I want to give you a tour of Social Psychology Network and invite you to become a member. In this video, I'll give you a tour of Social Psychology Network with an emphasis on resources of interest to students, which isn't difficult because the network began as a resource for students. SPN was born in 1996 as an ugly duckling web syllabus for my social psychology course at Wesleyan, and it didn't really become a professional network until 1999 when the U.S. National Science Foundation began funding it. So thank you, NSF. In 2004, two leading professional societies, the Society for Personality and Social Psychology and the Society of Experimental Social Psychology, both became sponsors of the network. And in 2005, SPN became a member organization. It also has wonderful staff members and student interns who work around the clock, literally nights, weekends, holidays, to keep the network running and available 24 hours a day. So what exactly is Social Psychology Network, and what are its goals? Well, as you can see on the homepage of socialpsychology.org, the mission is to promote peace, social justice, and sustainable living through public education, research, and the advancement of psychology. So to take just one example, suppose that you were interested in either learning or teaching about the topic of racism. One thing you could do would be to search SPN's database of more than 20,000 classified links by typing the keyword racism into the search field here. Let's do that. And when we hit return, we'll get all manner of results. It might be organizations, researchers, events, publications, and so on. Now let's suppose that we're particularly interested in, say, books on racism. We can drill down by clicking on the Publications tab, and then under that we can see books, and we'll click on those, and there we have a number of books on racism, and not only that, but we have links to book reviews. SPN also has an advanced search in which you can specify the type of item you're looking for, say a college course. And we can pop open that category to further specify whether we're looking for a distance learning course or a regular course. And by the way, if you're interested in distance learning resources, SPN has a page specifically devoted to that in its navigation menu on the left. And on that page, you'll find degree programs in psychology, MOOCs, and much more. For instance, if we click on MOOCs, we're taken to that part of the page, and we can scroll through a list of free online courses. You might have noticed that SPN also has partner sites. These are sites that the Social Psychology Network team designed and manages on our web server. During our course, we'll use several of these partner sites, beginning with the randomizer form on Research Randomizer in assignment number 1. Another point of interest. SPN maintains topical pages that go way beyond social psychology, everything from clinical psychology to cultural psychology to neuroscience to peace psychology. In fact, let's click on peace psychology, and what you'll see is that these pages begin with a table of contents on specific topics. So in this case, you see Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., and graduate studies in peace psychology. If we zoom back to the top of the page, you'll see that graduate programs in social and personality psychology can also be searched geographically. For example, let's click on, Asia, and maybe click on one of the programs in India, which pops open a bubble with a link that will in turn take us right to that graduate program's website. So there it is. Or if I close this window and type in a location like CA, short for California, we're taken to that geographic area, and we can click on specific programs in the side panel. So let's see, I'll click on the University of California at Berkeley. Wonderful school, there's the bubble, and if I click on the link, I'm again taken to the program. For anyone contemplating a career in psychology, the Online Psychology Career Center is another resource that might interest you. There's a direct link listed a few lines above the distance learning page in the navigation menu on the left, and the Career Center includes everything from searchable job databases to tips on graduate school, internships, and financial aid. Let me just mention a few other resources that were developed specifically with students in mind. I'll go fast because you can always rewind the video. SPN has a job forum that allows you to receive email alerts whenever a particular type of job opens up that might interest you. For example, you could request alerts if a postdoctoral position opens up in Australia, one of my favorite countries. Another key element of the network is that it contains a searchable directory of approximately 2,000 social psychology experts from 50 different countries. One way to search for experts is through a map, similar to the graduate program map that I showed earlier. Or you can search the directory through the Directories menu here. If you're interested in a particular topic, say obedience, you can search all SPN profiles by typing a keyword or phrase into this field. So we'll just type obedience, and then once the results come in, I'll click on the top result so that you can see what a profile page looks like. There we go. As you can see, SPN profiles have tabs with an overview statement, publications, contact information, and anything else the profile holders decided to add, just as you might create a profile in Facebook or LinkedIn. For example, we can click on Publications by Professor Blass and flip through his books, some of which will actually be mentioned later in the course when we discuss research on obedience. We can also search the directory by research interests. So let's look for someone with expertise on attitudes, prejudice, intergroup relations, neuroscience, and let's throw in the internet for good measure. Because we combined so many different areas of expertise, there's currently only one person who covers them all, Mahzarin Banaji of Harvard University. And if we click on her profile, there are several things worth noting. First, there are links to social media, to her curriculum vitae, and an article about her in Wikipedia. You can see that there's also a link to her research laboratory under the Research tab. And if we click on the Files tab, there are some nice photos in her image gallery. But the profile feature that I especially want to highlight is the SPN Mentor designation under the Teaching tab. This means that the expert is willing to offer free career advice and assistance to students from underrepresented groups as defined in this box. To receive that assistance, you just visit the SPN Mentorship Program page and follow the instructions. There are over 500 mentors to choose from worldwide, and we've set it up so that students can even geo-search the database. For example, if we go to the map of profiled experts and we choose Europe, we get a map of SPN profile holders, which we can then limit to mentors with expertise in, for example, let's choose personality psychology. And there you go. With respect to the mentorship program, all I ask is that you please don't contact Professor Banaji because I don't want to flood her with requests as a result of showing her profile in this video. Well, that's a lot of ground that we've covered, geographically and otherwise, so let's pause for a pop-up question. Hello again. In an earlier lecture video, I mentioned inviting you to join Social Psychology Network, which I very much hope that you'll do. But let me say up front that unlike the course, joining the network is not free, and I understand that some of you may not have the resources to join or may not have the desire. That's okay. Everyone is welcome to take this course and use the resources in Social Psychology Network for free, regardless of whether you're a member or not. But for those of you who can afford to join, I want to strongly ask that you do, for two reasons. First, it helps us cover the cost of offering all the resources and services shown in this video. Neither Wesleyan nor I receive any funds from SPN memberships. 100% of the money goes toward resources for students and other users of the network. Second, Coursera students who join the network will be given their own SPN page, very similar actually to the professional profiles I showed you earlier, but with an extra feature. Through a special arrangement, Coursera students with an SPN member page will have the option of displaying their course certificate directly on their network page, which can be used when applying for jobs or internships, or really any situation in which you want to display credentials and experience that might relate to psychology, education, business, health, and so on. How much does it cost to join the network? A basic membership is $25 per calendar year, but for Coursera learners, we've dropped the membership rate to $10 per year, or free if you're taking this course for a certificate. That is, if you purchase the course from Coursera, it comes with a free membership in Social Psychology Network. To purchase the course, simply sign in to your Coursera account, visit the list of courses you've enrolled in, choose to purchase Social Psychology, and then, after a 24-hour processing period, visit our course page and click on Join Social Psychology Network under the Resources area on the left. So I hope that you join the network. We would love, love, love to have you as a member if it doesn't present a financial burden. There's a Join the Network button right on our course page, and when you complete the snapshot quiz, you'll also be given an opportunity to join the network or just complete the quiz. And either way, all the instructions are right there. Please complete the snapshot quiz before watching any further videos. And then once you're done, you're most welcome to watch the next video, which is on the psychological construction of reality. It should be a fun video. One of the most basic questions we can ask about two people is whether they share the same reality. whether they see the same thing when they're both looking at it, whether they hear the same thing when they're both listening to it. In daily life, we typically assume that other people share our reality, and to a great extent they do. But not always, and not completely. Our perceptions are powerfully influenced by where our attention happens to be, by context, by past experience, expectations, motivations, and many other factors. In other words, our experience of reality is psychologically constructed. I spoke about this principle when I pointed out that the cards in our course image contain a surprise that most people don't notice. A black 10 of diamonds instead of the normal red. You can see the same sort of thing in this photo of a drive-through sign that says over 99 billion served. See anything strange? Most people don't see anything wrong with this photo until it's pointed out that the restaurant's name says McDonald's rather than McDonald's. When we look at restaurant signs, we don't usually spell check them any more than we need to check the color of playing cards. Or take a look at this photo. Most people see this image as showing an ordinary handshake and leave it at that. Why? We don't usually need to count the number of fingers in a handshake. We often see what we expect to see and don't see what we don't expect to see. But perception isn't just a matter of expectations, it's also a matter of motivations. That is, we often see what we want to see and don't see what we don't want to see. This dynamic was illustrated in a classic 1954 study of two American football rivals, Princeton and Dartmouth. After an especially rough football game with lots of penalties, the researchers asked students at each school to watch the very same film of the game and record each rule violation that they saw. The results? Princeton students saw Dartmouth break the rules over twice as often as Dartmouth students did. That is, they saw a different reality. According to the researchers, it's inaccurate and misleading to say that different people have different attitudes concerning the same thing, for the thing simply is not the same for different people, whether the thing is a football game, a presidential candidate, communism, or spinach. That's a colorful way of putting it, but again, we come back to the psychological construction of reality. The idea that our perceptions are affected by what we expect to see, by what we want to see, by what we're paying attention to, and so forth. One of my all-time favorite examples illustrating this point comes from British psychologist and professional magician Richard Weissman, who has generously made available to our class a video of his color-changing card trick. So let's watch a master magician both entertain and educate us at the same time. Hope you enjoy.
Hi, I'm Richard, this is Sarah, and we're going to perform the amazing colour-changing card trick with this blue-backed deck of cards. Now the idea is very simple. I'm just going to spread the cards in front of Sarah and ask her to push any card towards the camera.
Right, okay, let's see. I'm going to go for this card here.
Okay. Now Sarah could have selected any card at all from the deck, but she selected the card which is now face down on the table. And what I'm going to ask her to do is show us which card she selected.
Right, so the card that I chose was in fact the 3 of diamonds.
The 3 of diamonds, okay, an excellent choice. That card goes back into the deck. Now I'm just going to spread the cards face up on the table, give a little click of the fingers, and you'll see that Sarah's card here has now got a blue back. Not particularly surprising. What's slightly more surprising is all of the other cards have got red backs. And that is the amazing colour-changing card trick. Hi, I'm Richard, this is Sarah, and we're going to perform the amazing colour-changing card trick with this blue-backed deck of cards. Now the idea is very simple. I'm just going to spread the cards in front of Sarah and ask her to push any card towards the camera.
Right, okay, let's see. I'm going to go for this card here.
Okay. Now Sarah could have selected any card at all from the deck, but she selected the card which is now face down on the table. And what I'm going to ask her to do is show us which card she selected.
Right, so the card that I chose was in fact the 3 of diamonds.
The 3 of diamonds, okay, an excellent choice. That card goes back into the deck. Now I'm just going to spread the cards face up on the table, give a little click of the fingers, and you'll see that Sarah's card here has now got a blue back. Not particularly surprising. What's slightly more surprising is all of the other cards have got red backs. And that is the amazing colour-changing card trick.
Isn't that terrific? The color-changing card trick is an example of what psychologists call change blindness. In this case, it was blindness to changes in color made while our attention was focused elsewhere. But perceptions can also be influenced even when our attention is focused directly on the item of interest. Here's an example that I created specifically for this class. This is just a black and white field with a tree and a fence. Not very interesting or colorful, so I'll add an apple to the tree. Well, that's a little large. There, that's better. Now, there's an old expression about the grass being greener on the other side of the fence, meaning that the things we don't have often seem a little better, and that's what I want you to focus on. I'm going to cover up the grass on the other side of the fence with a nice bright color, and I want you to keep your eyes focused on the apple and your thoughts focused on turning the grass green. And let me be clear, I'm not going to change the black and white photo in any way. I'm not going to add more apples to the tree or do anything to the fence. I just want you to look at the apple and concentrate on the part of the photo that's covered up. In a few seconds, I'll remove the cover, and when I do, please continue looking at the apple in the tree, and you should see something interesting. Ready? Here we go. And again, please continue looking at the apple even after I've removed the cover. 1, 2, 3. If you have color vision, the grass should indeed be greener on the other side of the fence, at least for a little while. If you look away from the apple for a few seconds, the effect will start to fade, and you'll see that the photo is just the same one that I showed you at first. What happened is that staring at the magenta-colored background temporarily fatigued your eye's photoreceptors for that color, which knocked your color perception a little bit off base. If before this demonstration I had asked you whether there was any circumstance under which your eyes would have seen half of a black and white photo as green, you probably would have said no. It sounds kind of crazy. Why? Because we generally regard photographic images as generating fixed perceptions. We don't think of our visual perceptions as a combination of something out there with what's going on in our visual system at the time of perception. But in fact, that's exactly what vision is. And it's not just a matter of color. Here's a black and white example of how our view of the world can be warped in under 30 seconds. This example comes from Professor Michael Bach at the University of Freiburg in Germany. All you need to do is stare at the center of the spirals and don't look away. Keep looking, even though it's a little bit hard to do. You don't need to concentrate. Just let your eyes comfortably rest on the center of the spirals. As you do this, your neural motion detectors will adapt to the movement, and in just a few seconds, when you look away, your visual system will be basically thrown into reverse, and you'll temporarily experience what's called a motion after effect. Okay? You can look away now. Pretty amazing, huh? Let's pause for a wavy pop-up question. So to summarize, our perceptions are a joint function of what's going on out there and what's going on over here. An optical illusion that offers, I think, a very nice metaphor for this interplay is the rotating snakes illusion that was created by Akiyoshi Kitaoka of Japan. The coils that seem to be moving are supposed to be snakes, but I actually think of them as gear wheels. If you focus on just one corner of the image, you can see that the gears aren't actually moving, but our mental gears turn when we look at the image as a whole. Even something as basic as line length can be distorted, as the famous Ponzo illusion shows. Here you can see that the two lines are identical in length, but when you change the context, most people see the top line as slightly wider than the bottom line. Illusions like this work in part because our visual system has evolved to see a particular world, a world in which, for example, converging lines indicate distance. Our visual system isn't neutral, and when we give it a world in which converging lines don't indicate distance, it still makes the correction that the lines aren't of equal length, even when in fact they are. And this too is a good metaphor for how people function with one another in daily life. That is, people aren't neutral. Instead, they come in with certain predispositions, certain tendencies that lead them to process social information in very particular ways. When you show people a photo of children, they naturally process facial information to see whether the children are happy or sad. When we see a close-up of someone's face, we wonder automatically what the person might be thinking, whether the person seems dangerous or friendly, and so on. Usually these processes are automatic and beneficial. Certainly there's an evolutionary benefit to knowing as rapidly as possible whether your kids are okay, or whether a stranger poses a threat. But when we're focused on one thing, that means we're not focused on another. It means we can miss things, even fairly large things. If we don't notice that someone's mouth is upside down, or that someone's eyes have been flipped around, what else are we missing when we try to read each other's faces for much more subtle things and interact with each other on a day-to-day basis? It's a question we'll explore in the next two videos when we discuss confirmation biases and a close cousin, self-fulfilling prophecies. I'd like to begin this video with an item from the snapshot quiz, the question about 4 playing cards. So if you haven't completed the quiz yet, please stop this video. Truly, stop the video.
Stop! Stop the video!
It's very important that you complete the quiz because it sets up not just the rest of this video, but the rest of the course. The snapshot quiz is designed to be fun and interesting, and it's there for you, not for me. I'm not selling anything. I'm not going to share anybody's answers or identity or anything of that nature. It's there to make the course interactive and engaging and educational. So my advice, friendly advice, stop, 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 and complete the quiz if you want the full experience of this course. I really think you'll get more out of it. Anyway, here is the quiz item that I wanted to consider. Suppose that each of these playing cards, showing A, D, 4, and 7, has a letter on one side and a number on the other. And someone tells you, if a card has a vowel on one side, it has an even number on the other side. Question: which of the cards would you need to flip over if you wanted to find out whether the person's lying? Seems like a fairly easy question, but for most of us, it's not. If you completed the snapshot quiz, you should now be able to see your answer in the following screen. The correct answer is A and 7, because the only way to falsify a statement of the form if X then Y, if vowel then even number, is to find an instance of X and not Y, that is vowel and odd number. Cards without either a vowel or an odd number aren't relevant. For example, the card with a D can't tell you anything about cards with a vowel, so there's no need to turn it over. If this seems a little confusing, you're not alone. When Peter Wason and Phil Johnson-Laird put this type of question to 128 university students, they found that answers like A and 4, or even just A, were the most common responses, given by 59 students and 42 students respectively. In other words, cards capable of confirming the rule were those most often seen as the cards needed to test the rule, which isn't the same thing, and which shows what psychologists call a confirmation bias. A confirmation bias is a preference for information that's consistent with a preconception rather than information that challenges it. So let me give you another example. This is a problem that I adapted from the book Human Inference by Dick Nisbett and Lee Ross. Suppose that some researchers are interested in whether a particular symptom happens to be associated with a very common disease. So they do a year-long study of 150 people, and they find the following results. 2 questions. First, in a table like this, which cells do you need to examine in order to tell whether the symptom is associated with the disease? And second, in this particular case, is the symptom positively associated with the disease? Let's pause to see how you answered these questions in the snapshot quiz. Many people answer that the present cell in the upper left area of the table, or maybe that cell combined with the absent cell in the lower right, are what you would need to examine. And they say that in this particular instance, the symptom is positively associated with the disease because in most cases, 80 out of 150 times, the symptom and disease occur together. And in another 10 cases, the disease is absent when the symptom's absent. So the presence or absence of the symptom usually matches the presence or absence of the disease. All told, there's a match 60% of the time, 90 out of 150 cases. So it seems like the disease and symptom are related. But that's not actually a dependable way to solve a problem like this. In truth, all 4 cells of the table are needed to know whether the symptom and disease are related, even though it feels like the present cell is what's most important. To tell whether the symptom and disease are associated, you need to compare the chances of people having the disease when the symptom's present, which is 80 out of 120 cases, or 67%, and the chances of people having the disease when the symptom is absent, which is 20 out of 30 cases, still 67%. And of course, this gives us the answer to the second question. In this particular case, the disease and the symptom are entirely unrelated because the chances of having the disease are the same whether you've got the symptom or not. It's 67% in both cases. This sort of thinking does not come naturally to most people. For instance, consider another example adapted from the book by Dick Nisbett and Lee Ross, the question of whether God answers prayers. Many people would say yes, because they've prayed for something, for example, the survival of a loved one who's on the edge of death, and sure enough, it's come about. But that's only the present cell of the table. To fully answer the question of whether people are more likely to survive when they're prayed for, you would need to know how often people on the edge of death die despite being prayed for, how often people on the edge of death survive when no one prays for them, and believe it or not, how many people on the edge of death die when no one prays for them, controlling, of course, for all sorts of other factors that might have an effect. Obviously, this kind of approach is very different than how most of us operate in daily life. And please understand, this is not a case against the value of prayer. The same principle would operate if somebody were to lose faith in prayer because they prayed for something that didn't come about. That would also be just one cell in the table. The point is that all 4 cells are relevant. And yet, when we have a theory about something and we get some supporting evidence, we typically conclude that the theory was correct. We don't go out of our way to seek disconfirming evidence and examine all 4 cells of the table. So let's pause for a quick check to make sure you can tell whether 2 variables, like the presence of a symptom and disease, are statistically related to each other. Now that we've talked about confirmation biases, you might be wondering, why are they of concern to social psychologists? Well, there are many reasons, but here's just one. When individuals and groups interact with each other, they usually have expectations. And there's plenty of research that suggests that those expectations do not always receive a fair test. Instead, people tend to seek out evidence that confirms their expectations, and they give greater weight to that evidence than evidence that would disconfirm their expectations. Counter evidence, if it's even noticed at all, is usually very easy to explain away. So the very same mechanism that operates in Wason's research also operates when people have stereotypes about women, or about racial minorities, or about professors. People focus mainly on confirming evidence and end up perpetuating the stereotypes or the preconceptions or social expectations that they have, especially when they're not highly motivated to question those beliefs. So confirmation biases can have important consequences, but they're only half the equation. Social expectations not only lead us to seek out confirming evidence, they can have an effect on the person about whom we hold the expectation. In other words, social expectations affect not only the person who holds them, but the other side as well. And it's that side of the equation that we'll focus on in the next video. As we've seen in earlier videos, our experience of reality isn't simply a function of what's out there. Our perceptions are also influenced by context, by previous experience, and by our tendency to seek out evidence that confirms our expectations. But social perceptions and social expectations affect more than the person who holds them. They can also affect the person about whom the expectations are held. In fact, in some cases, our predictions and our expectations can lead to self-fulfilling prophecies. The term self-fulfilling prophecy was coined in a classic 1948 journal article by a sociologist named Robert Merton. Here's what Merton wrote. The self-fulfilling prophecy is, in the beginning, a false definition of the situation, evoking a new behavior which makes the originally false conception come true, thereby perpetuating a reign of error. For the prophet will cite the actual course of events as proof of being right from the beginning. Such are the perversities of social logic. What Merton is saying is that a self-fulfilling prophecy is a misconception, but it's a misconception that later becomes true. In social psychology, there have been hundreds of investigations of self-fulfilling prophecies, but by far the most famous is a book-length study published in 1968 by psychologist Robert Rosenthal and school principal Lenore Jacobson. I wasn't able to get a photo of Lenore Jacobson, but here are photos of Professor Rosenthal and the school where the study was conducted. In the experiment, grade school teachers were given diagnostic information indicating that roughly 1 out of every 5 students would bloom academically in the coming year. And as measured by intelligence tests 8 months later, these students did improve more than other students. What makes the study by Rosenthal and Jacobson interesting is that these academic bloomers were selected at random. The diagnostic information teachers were given had been assigned using a table of random numbers. Apparently, when teachers were told that certain randomly selected students would do well, they gave these students more attention and more praise than they gave the other students. And as a result, these students actually improved more than the other students did. Their IQ scores increased within 8 months. Not all students, and not by a huge amount, but for first and second grade students, the increase was statistically significant, meaning that the difference probably wasn't by chance alone. Rosenthal and Jacobson call this phenomenon the Pygmalion effect, after the George Bernard Shaw play Pygmalion, in which Professor Higgins turns an uneducated flower girl into a lady by teaching her to dress and speak in such a way that people expect her to be a lady. Since 1968, the Pygmalion effect has been replicated in all sorts of settings, from elementary schools to high schools to universities, job settings. And although there are plenty of exceptions and the effect isn't always strong, there's no doubt that self-fulfilling prophecies do take place. In fact, studies suggest not only that teacher expectations can influence student performance, but student expectations about teachers can have an effect. One other thing to note about self-fulfilling prophecies in daily life is that their eventual truth can make it very hard to distinguish them from regular prophecies. For example, consider the case in which North Korea suspects that South Korea is aggressive, and to protect itself, North Korea begins arming. South Korea perceives the armament by North Korea as aggressive, and South Korea responds by arming defensively. North Korea interprets the defensive armament by South Korea as confirmation that South Korea is in fact aggressive, so North Korea arms even more. This situation is known in political science as a security dilemma, and one of the most frequently cited results of such a dilemma is World War I. Although we can never know for sure whether this was the case or not, many historians have argued that World War I was caused in part by misperceptions of aggression, mistaken expectations that ultimately proved true. What's interesting is that without a control group in which, say, North Korea doesn't begin by expecting South Korea to arm, and of course life doesn't come with a control group, we can never be absolutely sure whether North Korea's prophecy was self-fulfilling or simply prophetic. It's always possible that a country arms as an act of aggression, but it's also possible that the country would never have armed if it weren't expected to be aggressive. The only way to know for sure would be to see whether the country arms when the other side has no suspicions at the outset, when there are no expectations to become fulfilled. Well, fortunately, in the laboratory, it is possible to design control groups. And in the 1970s, Mark Snyder of the University of Minnesota conducted a series of really ingenious experiments on a special type of self-fulfilling prophecy known as behavioral confirmation. Behavioral confirmation takes place when people's social expectations lead them to act in a way that causes others to confirm these expectations. In other words, behavioral confirmation is a social type of self-fulfilling prophecy. Let me give you an example from one of the first and best-known studies documenting behavioral confirmation. In this study, published by Mark Snyder and Bill Swan, male college students competed in a reaction time contest with another student to see who could respond most quickly over 24 trials. Students were told that on an alternating basis, they would have access to a noise weapon that could deliver a distracting sound to the other person from level 1 all the way up to level 6, which was about as loud as a lawnmower. I'll give you a rough sense of what it was like, but let me first suggest you cover your ears or turn down the volume. It's pretty loud. Ready? Here we go. Okay, pretty loud. The participants were each given a set of headphones. That was weird. Anyway, they were given a set of headphones so that they could use the weapon against the other person without being blasted by the sound themselves. Specifically, student A could use the weapon on trials 1, 2, and 3. Then student B had it for trials 4 through 6. Then back to student A for another 3 trials. Then to student B, and so on. But here's the twist. Without student B knowing it, the experimenters led student A to think that student B was either a very competitive, aggressive person or a very cooperative person. In reality, these expectations were assigned at random. They didn't have anything to do with how aggressive student B actually was. But the expectations had a dramatic effect. When students were led to expect a partner who was aggressive, they came out with guns blazing, using weapon intensities in the high range 61% of the time. But when students expected a cooperative partner, they only used high intensities 28% of the time. And in response, students who were expected to be competitive returned fire, and actually became more aggressive. A textbook example of behavioral confirmation. In this case, a kind of Pygmalion effect gone bad, in which you expect the worst of someone and you get the worst. Because the expectations held by student A were randomly assigned by the experimenters, similar to a coin toss, we can be sure that the people student A competed with didn't differ in aggression before the study. In other words, we know that the prophecy was self-fulfilling, that it was a product of expectations. You might think of it like a laboratory version of a security dilemma. But there's more. In a second phase of the experiment, the researchers removed student A from the study and had student B compete in another 24-trial reaction time contest, this time with someone who wasn't told anything about whether student B was aggressive or cooperative. The experimenters wanted to see whether people who had earlier been expected to behave aggressively would continue to behave aggressively once the person who held that expectation had been removed from the environment. So they replaced student A with a new person who wasn't led to believe anything about student B one way or another. What did the researchers find? Under certain circumstances described in the research report, student A's expectations of aggression or cooperation continued to have an effect on student B's behavior with a new person. That is, student B continued to behave more aggressively when that behavior had been expected earlier than when it hadn't. Now think about that for a moment. What these results suggest is that beliefs can literally create reality, even after the person with the original beliefs has left the scene entirely. The implication is that, for better or worse, the beliefs that your friends, family members, teachers, or coworkers hold about you may in some cases continue to have an effect even when these individuals aren't physically present. As you might imagine, this research has received a lot of attention, and to this day it remains controversial. Robert Rosenthal himself estimates that studies on self-fulfilling prophecies only find the effect about 40% of the time. Also, the research underscores the importance of understanding how random assignment works. Without that, a lot of the studies that we discuss in this course are bound to be confusing. So this is actually a great time for you to finish the first assigned reading, and then right after that, the random assignment, which has a brief tutorial on random sampling and random assignment, both of which are taken from Research Randomizer, a social psychology network partner site. The assignment includes all the instructions that you need, and students tell me that it takes about 15 minutes to complete, start to finish, so it's not a terribly long assignment. Meanwhile, we can't very well end this video without a pop-up question, so here you go. So far, we've focused on several ways that our social perceptions can be influenced or even distorted by context effects, change blindness, confirmation biases, and a host of other psychological factors. So you might be thinking, do we ever get it right? The answer, as we'll explore in this video, is yes. Not only are we capable of getting it right, but we often make accurate judgments with surprising speed and sensitivity. In other words, a balanced view of social perception is that, on one hand, it can be distorted by all sorts of factors, just as any other perception can be. But on the other hand, it can also operate with surprising efficiency. Let me give you an example. In 2011, a rather extraordinary study was published by Nick Rule and Nalini Embody, asking people to rate college yearbook photos on a variety of dimensions, some of which had to do with how powerful the person in the photo seemed to be. The photos were all cropped so that only the person's face was visible. All the photos were the same size. They were converted to grayscale rather than color. So in other words, they were very much standardized. But these weren't any old photos. They were college yearbook photos of people who would later become the managing partners, the head lawyer, for nearly 3/4 of the top 100 American law firms, according to the Law.com website. And what the researchers found was that social judgments about how powerful the person looked in college, before the person even entered law school, were statistically related to how much profit the person's law firm made when the person was now the managing partner, 20 to 50 years after college. That's an amazing degree of precision based on social judgments made from one black and white photo taken decades earlier. Incredible. Let me give you another example. John Gottman, a relationship researcher at the University of Washington, invited 124 newlywed couples to visit his laboratory and be videotaped while they discussed an ongoing disagreement in their marriage. These videos were then rated by independent observers as to how much positive or negative emotion had been displayed in the first 3 minutes of the couple's discussion. The results? Social judgments of this brief marital interaction significantly predicted which couples were divorced 6 years later. It's surprising enough that anything could predict divorce 6 years into the future, but it borders on shocking that the prediction could be made by strangers watching the couple interact for only 3 minutes. What's known in psychology as a thin slice of behavior, a brief observation, a small sample of behavior. The term thin slice was coined in a 1992 Psychological Bulletin article by Nalini Ambady and Bob Rosenthal, the same person who documented the Pygmalion effect, and it was popularized in Malcolm Gladwell's runaway bestseller, Blink. Ambady and Rosenthal conducted what's known as a meta-analysis, a statistical technique that combines and analyzes results from different studies, literally an analysis of analyses, a meta-analysis. And what they found, based on a review of 38 different results reported by a wide variety of researchers, is that judgments about people's personality, or whether they're telling the truth, or whether they're clinically depressed, were just as accurate, if not more so, when the judgments were based on thin slices of behavior, less than 5 minutes in length. In fact, a year after the 1992 article, Ambady and Rosenthal published a study showing that ratings by people who watched 3 10-second video clips of a university teacher teaching a class with no students in the video and no sound accurately predicted student ratings of the teacher at the end of the semester. What I just showed you was exactly 10 seconds of a professor teaching. All it took was 3 video clips just like that, all of it nonverbal. Things like whether the teacher seemed confident, enthusiastic, warm, active, and so on. Professor Ambady and her colleagues have also found that long-term physical therapy outcomes could be predicted after people watched only 1 minute of silent video footage focused on the therapist's nonverbal behavior. The sales effectiveness of a sales manager could be identified after listening to the person's voice for only 20 seconds, with the words masked to keep the tone of voice but hide the content of what was said. And in a similar study, the more dominant a surgeon's voice was rated, the more likely the surgeon was to have been sued for malpractice. Voice ratings that were made after listening to only 40 seconds of the doctor speaking. Now, if these results seem incredible, just hang on to your hat for 2 more examples of thin slice research. The first line of research, kicked off by a Princeton social psychologist named Alex Todorov, examined whether election outcomes could be predicted solely on the basis of judgments about candidate photos. In a 2005 article published in the journal Science, he and his colleagues reported that when they asked people to look at pairs of black and white portraits showing candidates for the U.S. Senate, the candidate who won and the candidate who lost, the individual who was judged as more competent ended up winning the election over 2/3 of the time. The photos you see here were one of the pairs used in the study, which Professor Todorov was generous enough to share with our class, and you can see which candidate you judged as most competent in the snapshot quiz. If it was Russ Feingold, the candidate on the left, you would have accurately predicted the election results. How long did it take people to make these judgments? They were able to make them after seeing the paired photos for only 1 second and taking an additional second to make the judgment. That is, it took them a grand total of about 2 seconds to make a judgment that predicted the winner. These were political candidates, I should underscore, whom people had never even seen before, and yet they rendered these judgments with lightning speed. In fact, a 2007 follow-up study found that people's judgments were just as predictive of an election outcome when they viewed the photos for a quarter of a second than if they were given an unlimited amount of time to look them over. 68.5% in the first case and 62.5% in the second. Here's what a quarter of a second looks like. You ready? I'll show you that one more time just in case you missed it. Here we go. Remarkable, huh? And a study published in 2012 found that even if you show people headshots for 2 seconds without most of the face, their competence judgments still predict the winner 65% of the time. So clearly, people can size up strangers with remarkable speed. But the results we've discussed leave 2 key questions unanswered. First, can people make thin-slice judgments that are accurate when it comes to personal characteristics and other aspects of a person's identity? Remember, we don't know whether the candidates who are judged competent actually are competent. We just know that perceptions of competence predict election outcomes. And second, if people can make accurate judgments, how fast can they do it? Well, I warned you to hang onto your hat for 2 last examples of thin slice research. Here's the second one. In 2008, the same research team that did the college yearbook study published a report that examined whether people could accurately guess the sexual orientation of 90 men whose faces were shown in black and white photos. Half the photos showed heterosexual men, half showed gay men, and the faces were cropped from ear to ear and from the chin to the top of the head with no background except for white. This slide shows a transformation of my own photo that the researchers kindly supplied so that our class can get to see the sort of image that they used. In the real study, they didn't use any photos of men with jewelry, with glasses, or facial hair, just to keep the focus on facial features alone. So, were people able to identify the sexual orientation of male strangers from a photo? And if so, how rapidly were they able to do it? The answer is that people were able to detect a stranger's sexual orientation above chance levels even when the photos were shown for only a 20th of a second. To give you a sense of how blisteringly fast that is, I've set up a simulated trial that you can experience in this video. So if you were a participant, you would just look at the cross in the center white area when it appears, watch the 50 millisecond flash of the photo, followed by what's known as a mask for a 1/10 of a second afterward, and then you'd press a key on your keyboard to give your answer. The Z key if you think the person's gay, or the / key if you think the person's straight, that is, heterosexual. So, you ready for the simulated trial? Here goes. Isn't that something? That was 50 milliseconds, a 20th of a second, so fast that we barely even recognize we've seen a face, and yet, even if we're not consciously aware of what we've seen, our brain is able to process the information and render judgments that are correct more often than you'd expect by chance alone. So now, if we go back to an item in the snapshot quiz, the answer should be clear. The item said, social judgments made during the first minute of meeting a stranger are not usually reliable and accurate. Let's pause for a moment so you can see how you answered. What's the correct answer according to the research record? Drum roll, please. False. How does it happen? Well, researchers are not entirely clear. There have been several theories advanced. For example, one idea is that there may be evolutionary value in being able to rapidly judge if other people are threats, potential partners, or even effective leaders. There's also some evidence that our brains are wired to process emotions more rapidly than cognitions. For example, we might know how we feel before we know why we feel that way. And of course, thin slice judgments happen so fast that they might simply avoid distractions that could lower their accuracy. Regardless, we can now put the pieces together from the past several videos to see both the strengths and weaknesses of social perception. Social judgments can take place very rapidly, sometimes with more accuracy than we might think. At the same time, they're also prone to certain biases and distortions, and once these judgments are formed, whether accurately or not, we tend to lock in and search for confirming evidence rather than challenging the judgments we've already made. So, first impressions matter. Let's end with a brief pop-up question on the topic of first impressions, a topic that we'll explore further in the next video. Last time we focused on thin slice research, showing that social judgments can be made with surprising speed and accuracy even when they're based on just a single photo or the sound of somebody's voice or a few brief video clips of behavior. But what about judgments made in person? For example, suppose you were applying for a job. Person's a total stranger to you. How long would it take the job interviewer to form an impression of you? To help answer that question, I want to share an excerpt from a wonderful British program called The Human Zoo.
We want to learn more about first impressions. How are they formed, and how long does it take? It's a big day for these three women. They're competing for a secretarial job starting Monday morning, and we've been allowed in to film their interviews. They've got 15 minutes each to prove their worth. Or have they? We're about to find out how long it really takes to make a lasting impression. The candidates will be facing Judy Fisher, a recruitment consultant with 30 years' experience. We've given her this dial, which is connected to our control room hidden away in an adjoining office. There, we're effectively going to read Judy's mind. This machine will make a trace of her thought processes. If Judy's impressed, she'll turn her dial up. That will produce a trace high on the screen. If she's underwhelmed, she'll turn it down and the trace will sink. Everything will be scrutinized by occupational psychologist Terry Kellard.
Bridget.
Hi.
Hello, I'm Judy Fisher. Thanks for coming along and being prepared to do this. We're going to talk first of all, Bridget, a little bit about what you've done and about what you're looking for. Then I'm going to tell you a bit more about the job and we can take it from there.
Great.
Okay?
Yeah.
Bridget's been sitting down for just 12 seconds and said all of 5 words. But her trace has immediately gone up from an average reading of 0 to an impressive 56.
Let's just start with, I've got your CV here.
Clearly she's got a positive impression. That's the most important bit of the interview. That would have been based on what she looks like. She looks like a PA.
Yeah, I like that, and I'm good at that, and I'm efficient and fast, and I do as much of making sure everything's in order as possible.
The trace remains high right till the end, finishing at nearly 100. Bridget's prospects look good.
Well, you seem very focused. I'm sure you will. You've done really well.
Thank you very
so
much. That's great. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
When anybody meets anybody anywhere for the first time, in order to process information, it is absolutely essential to make a judgment about this person. So essentially what people do is make up their mind about a person and what that person's like, generally within the first 15 seconds.
Sometimes you could make your mind up so quickly that I just didn't give them the benefit of any further doubt.
Well, I have to say that strong aftershave and strong perfume, for that matter, are one of my bête noirs.
I would be very reluctant to employ a man with fair eyelashes.
I can think of instances where I can't remember anything about what happened or the person. All I can remember is this smell coming towards me and wanting to get away from it. badly.
And all I could see through the glass table was the fact that she hadn't shaved her legs, and there were these black hairs sort of just like sprouting through the tights, and I couldn't get beyond that.
Not crazy about Gray's shoes, I'm afraid. I don't quite know why that I feel that way.
I mean, she couldn't have shaved her legs for weeks.
Lucy, hello, I'm Judy Fisher. Thanks so much for coming along to see me. We're going to just talk a little bit about...
Lucy looks fine, so her trace starts slightly above average, but only just, and it doesn't last.
It was my favourite subject at school.
Listen to her voice. It's beginning to lack expression.
You were there for a couple of
She's
years.
licking her lips, signs of tension.
Long term, something...
At best, the
quite
trace is
different
mediocre.
again,
At
to my
worst, it
background.
drops.
I'm interested in alternative health and nutrition, and one day I'd like to make my career out of that.
In what? Doing what? On what side of it?
Well, possibly working from home and perhaps in a clinic as well as a alternative health therapist and advisor.
Lucy's lifestyle ambitions don't impress. Her trace sinks from +30 to -30 in 20 seconds. But the next candidate's trace will sink like a stone.
Now this should be very interesting.
Shopping bags, an obvious mistake. But how quickly and dramatically will they affect her trace?
Valeria, hello, I'm
Hi.
Judy Fisher. Good to meet you. Thanks for coming in.
In 3 seconds, it's plummeted to a feeble -50. Neither Lucy nor Bridget ever sank that low.
Carrying shopping bags, low levels of eye contact, and nothing positive has happened yet.
And on the creative side, you're keen cinema and theatre goer?
Yeah, very
go
much
a
so,
lot.
very much.
What was the last thing you saw in the cinema?
I haven't been for ages, actually. What was the last thing I saw?
And what about your sort of attention to detail? Are you quite thorough?
Yeah, yeah.
Because you have got 3 spelling mistakes in your CV.
Do I?
Yes.
If you convey a bad first impression, you have to work very, very, very hard indeed. There was a little bit of research that showed that it takes 8 positive pieces of positive information before you can overcome a bad first impression. My view would be that even that's very, very difficult.
Unlike the other 2 candidates, Valeria was in fact an actress planted by us without Judy's knowledge.
I'd actually been told by Terry to fidget, to not look her in the eye, to not smile, and to move around in my chair quite a bit, and just be evasive in general.
Looking at the 3 graphs together, Valeria came a miserable 3rd behind Bridget first and Lucy second. But look closely at the first 5 seconds. The 3 women have already been ranked in order, and the order never alters.
I didn't find it very easy to go back on a snap judgment that I had made, and possibly I'd lost some very fine candidates.
It sounds very unfair, but the moment somebody walks in the room for an interview, I know or I can guess quite a lot about them just from the way they're dressed.
Bridget, hello. Well done. You did really well in your interview. You were absolutely excellent, and we're delighted to offer you the job. So many congratulations.
Thanks very much.
And the very best of luck.
That's great, thank you.
Bridget's been in her new job for 10 months now and is doing well.
I was quite surprised that it showed the results so quickly, the first 5 seconds, though some of them were very obvious. Valeria was, within the first 5 seconds, was going to have to fight very hard to get better. But first impressions are very, very important.
What this video suggests, and what research on impression formation has found, is that social impressions are formed with amazing speed, even when people have plenty of time to ask each other questions. In other words, the first few seconds of an interaction between strangers is often the most important time period their relationship will ever have. It may, for example, determine whether they'll work together, whether they'll become friends, date each other, or even get married. Yet there's a problem if we want to understand what other people think of us during that important first impression. Precisely because we don't have a close relationship with people we haven't met before, they're probably not going to openly share what they think of us, and they're certainly not going to offer us tips on how we can make a better impression. But in this class, We can overcome that obstacle because we're a learning community set up to help each other. And that's exactly what the next assignment is designed to do. The assignment, which I call the social challenge, is to create a social psychology network page that leads strangers, in this case classmates, to form a positive impression of you when they first encounter the page. The assignment will be peer assessed, which means not only that you'll receive a score, but that you'll receive specific suggestions on how to improve the impression you're making. If you post photos of yourself, which ones do people like? If you write a biographical description, what do people think of it? Should you try to be funny, polite, artistic, knowledgeable? The reading for next week, which focuses on the self in a social world, fits perfectly with this assignment. So once you've had a chance to do the reading and watch the next set of lectures, please use the social psychology you're learning when you create a page that presents yourself to the social world. When you reach that part of the course, you'll see a page with details on the assignment. For example, explaining how the assignment will work if you're not a member of Social Psychology Network. So to sum up, the second assignment offers a really unique opportunity to learn about social psychology, to learn about the social impressions that you make, and to end up, after the course is over, with a web page that other people who also know something about social psychology have helped you to perfect. But now let me just end by congratulating you for completing the last lecture of week number 1. I'm assuming, of course, that you're watching the lectures in order. That's important. Also, let me remind you to complete the first reading assignment and the random assignment by the deadline that's given in the web course page. And here is a pop-up question to finish out the lecture. I will see you next week.